Hi, it's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives of families of critically ill patients in intensive care, so that you can have peace of mind, real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making fast, even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. This is another episode of Your Questions Answered, and in last week's episode I answered another question from our readers, and the question last week was part 2 of my partner is in intensive care on a ventilator. The intensive care team wants to do a tracheostomy and I want to have him extubated. What do I do? You can check out the answer to last week's question by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's episode of Your Questions Answered, I want to answer another question from one of our readers, and the question this week is: my cousin's husband is dying in intensive care and she can't let go. How can I help her? So Judy writes, "Hi Patrick, how can I tell my cousin that she needs to let her husband in intensive care go? He has end-stage COPD and is not weanable on a ventilator and has had a tracheostomy for 2 months now. My cousin really needs to ask her husband what he wants now to possibly be removed from the ventilator and whether he wants to die peacefully, as it has been such a struggle for many years and especially for the last 2 months in intensive care. My cousin's husband can't be weaned off the ventilator. He's 70 years of age, he's having end-stage COPD, and he had a right MAC stroke and heart failure since last November. I am an LPN and an OT, so I have a little bit of insight into the intensive care world. My cousin and her husband have been in denial about his situation for a long time, and they now can't face it. He's been in a poor condition for many years, and he's been very non-compliant without much help from their doctor either. He's been having pneumonia since October, which got him hospitalized. He also has a PEG tube, which is a feeding tube. He has no gag reflex or no cough reflex, basically the typical signs of a stroke. What do you think I can do in order to help them accepting this terrible situation? Thanks, Judy." Hi Judy, thank you for taking the time to write your question. It sounds like your family, your cousin and her husband in particular, are in a difficult and challenging situation. Given that you are a health professional yourself, you probably know how difficult it can be at the end of people's life to let go. And I take the age of your cousin's husband out of the equation, because I have seen people being successfully weaned off the ventilator at the age of 78 and beyond. However, from what you are describing, your cousin's husband obviously has had a severe stroke, ended up on a ventilator in intensive care, and he now has a tracheostomy and a PEG feeding tube in order to keep him alive. Even worse, he has no gag reflex and therefore will be unable to be weaned off the tracheostomy and the ventilator. The combination of ventilator, tracheostomy and the PEG or feeding tube is a combination that can keep people alive for long periods of time, as you know. And I'm very glad that you bring up the question and the issue for your cousin, who is obviously in a situation where she can't or doesn't want to make a decision of what to do next. It sounds to me like no worst case scenario discussions have occurred before your cousin's husband was still able to communicate. This is a big issue, and it could often prevent those difficult and challenging situations happening in the first place. Nevertheless, your first step is to sit down with your cousin and explain the situation from your perspective as a health professional. Share your views compassionately and also explain to your cousin in detail that the current situation means suffering for all parties involved. Next, think about how you, your cousin, maybe another family member or the intensive care team can bring meaning to this situation. What I mean by that is, even though the situation is difficult, challenging and probably heartbreaking for your cousin and maybe for other immediate family as well, is there any meaning your cousin can make out of the situation? Is it a meaningful death? Is there anything your cousin family can learn from the situation? Are there any religious, cultural or spiritual needs that haven't been met as yet that would make a transition towards the end of life easier or more bearable? Also, and this is a big one from my perspective, is there any way that your cousin or your family can end the situation on their terms, not on the intensive care team's terms? You haven't mentioned the intensive care team, and depending on how they have handled the situation, there could have been animosities about how the intensive care team has handled this difficult situation, and that could have furthered the denial of your cousin. And I don't want to speculate here of what or what hasn't been done by the intensive care team. The fact of the matter is that your cousin or some other key family member needs to feel to be in control of the situation in order to make the right decisions and make meaning out of this situation. Next, is there any way that, such as having your cousin's husband die at home, would make the situation more bearable? For example, in countries like Australia or Germany, specialized intensive home care nursing services provide intensive care patients and their families with the opportunity to die at home if they wanted to. That's a win-win situation, as it gives people what they want, and it also frees up expensive, scarce, precious and in-demand intensive care beds, and it saves money, as an ICU bed costs around $5,000 per bed day. And intensive home care is by far more cost effective. For more information, check out intensivecareathome.com.au. I presume you are in North America, and you may have to check out service availability for similar services in your area if that's of interest to you. Next, take a look at this article here and make sure that no matter what you or your cousin decide for the next steps, that your cousin's husband has a dignified death. Check out this video and article, a 5-step blueprint for dying well and with dignity in intensive care. You can find a link to this video and article in the written version below this video. Also, end-of-life situations in intensive care are a big challenge, and I have seen by far too many end-of-life and death situations that have been handled poorly. Also, death and end-of-life is a process, not an event. Therefore, it sounds like you might need to do some planning in order to make sure that once again, you and your cousin experience a death on your terms and not on anybody else's terms. It can make all the difference for having peace of mind, control, power and influence. And having peace of mind, control, power and influence in an end-of-life situation can make all the difference for the future of the family. Experiencing a bad end-of-life situation in intensive care can leave a very negative feeling for families and for the intensive care team. Therefore, make sure that all your cousins or family's needs are met, no matter what they are. 99% of families of critically ill patients in intensive care have no peace of mind, no control, no power and no influence because they are not asking the right questions. They take everything that the intensive care team is saying for face value, and they are intimidated by the intensive care team's perceived power and perceived authority. Experiencing a bad death in intensive care can leave families bitter and disappointed for the rest of their lives and make the grief they are going through beyond imaginable. Therefore, make sure that your cousins and your family's values and beliefs are known during this difficult and challenging situation to make the situation less challenging and more bearable. You should also check out this article or video, how to make sure that your values and beliefs are known whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Also, make sure that your cousin knows that irrespective of the challenges that she's facing, that she knows that you support her and gently guide her towards the death of her husband. End-of-life situations and death situations in intensive care are once again challenging, and even though you know that your cousin has difficulties of letting go, the only way is to probably gently guide her towards letting go by making her feel that she's in control. I really hope that helps, Judy. Please let me know if you have any more questions. I can also be available for a free 15-minute Skype consultation. My Skype ID is Patrick Hutzel. So, how can you have peace of mind, control, power and influence whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care? You get to that all-important feeling of peace of mind, control, power and influence when you download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn quickly how to get peace of mind, real power and real control, and how you can influence decision making fast whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Your free Instant Impact Report gives you in-depth insight that you must know whilst your loved one is critically ill or is even dying in intensive care. Sign up and download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you will also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions, discover the many competing interests in intensive care and how your critically ill loved one's treatment may depend on those competing interests, how to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle and vulnerability even if your loved one is dying. You get 5 killer tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to peace of mind, control, power and influence in your situation. You will get real-world examples that you can easily adapt to your and your critically ill loved one's situation. How to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team and how you will be seen as equals. You will get crucial behind-the-scenes insight so that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care, and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. Thank you for tuning into this week's Your Questions Answered, and I'll see you again in another update next week. Make sure you also check out our blog section for more tips and strategies, or send me an email to support@intensivcarehotline.com with your questions. Also check out our product section where you get more ebooks, videos and audio recordings, and where you can also get one-on-one consulting via Skype or over the phone. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivcarehotline.com, and I'll see you again next week in another update.